Good morning. Good morning, everyone. This morning, we're going to be looking at redemption again. And we're looking at it through the lens of Passover again. And there was as I was getting ready for this lesson, I really wanted to put into this lesson the cities of refuge. I don't know if you remember those cities, because there's a big implication there that God wanted to make sure justice was done and that blood feuds didn't ensue and continue, and I'll get to explain that a little bit more, but I didn't have time this morning, so I want you to think about those things in the back of your mind. We're only going to talk about Passover this morning, and I want us to think about some of those questions that I asked earlier during the Lord's Supper, and that was, what does it mean that God redeems us from death? What does it mean that we are redeemed by Jesus' blood? What does it mean that he redeems us by his blood? If we go back all the way to the beginning of creation, we can remember that it's only because God created us, because God is a God of life. He is life-giving. He is life-sustaining. That the only reason we have life is because we have God's breath inside of us. But the story of, especially the Old Testament, is the story of how his creation, his people, how people like you and me threw that gift away through violence, through oppression, through sinful acts towards other people. And so as a group, humanity has given themselves over to death, over to sin and death. And so the story of the Bible is all about how God will bring us out of death and back to where we belong. That is, back to life in him. And that transfer of possession from death to life is what redemption is. It is God repossessing us. And so in today's lesson, I want us to see a couple things from the Torah, from the first 5 books of the Bible here. We're going to look at a couple ways in how this word redeem is used. So it might be a little bit obscure what I'm going to talk about here, and I wish I had time to get into the cities of refuge and how someone could flee to one of those cities if they accidentally killed somebody. There was a place that they could be protected from the blood avenger, which is literally, if we're going to literally translate it, the blood redeemer. But we don't have time for that this morning. But let's get into this idea of, we've talked about it before, pada, which is a verb. It's a verb. It's an action that happens, right? The core idea of this word is something that belongs to a person, but somehow that person is no longer in possession of it. And now they are coming to reclaim that thing, or they are going to lay claim to it. They're going to repossess that thing. They're going to redeem it. They're going to release it from wrongful possession. This verb here shows up at least 59 times. And consistently, when this verb shows up, it shows us God, or a person who's acting on God's behalf. It consistently shows God or somebody acting on God's behalf, stepping in at some great personal cost to themselves to liberate the helpless. What I don't want you to think about here when I say the word repossess is Dog the Bounty Hunter. Did you ever watch that show? Yeah. It's not just look too weird. It was hard to look away because there was so much drama. Right? He's a repo man. He goes and repossesses people, in this case, because he's a bail bondsman, bounty hunter type person. But they also did repos and different other things too. And so I don't want us to think of somebody like that. I don't want you to think of repo man, of the repo man. It's the core idea of this is releasing from possession, from the possession of one person to the rightful owner. That is the core meaning of these words and these ideas that I'm trying to bring to you. And so the Hebrew word here, padah, there's also the Greek equivalent of this in the New Testament is lutron. That can also be translated as repossess or redeem. So sometimes the way things get repossessed is just by somebody going and taking them, right? Sometimes that's what happens. They say, this is mine, I'm taking it back, right? That's like God taking Israel back from Pharaoh. God doesn't pay Pharaoh anything. It's not like Pharaoh's holding them hostage. He's not demanding a payment and God pays them and so he lets them go. That's not how it works. But there is a life that is offered. And so part of this analogy works when we talk about a ransom being paid. And that life is paid on the night that becomes known as Passover, the night of Passover. I just want you to remember, though, I'm saying it for like the 15th time, God is not paying off Pharaoh. It's God both bringing divine justice on all the land of Egypt, including Israel, the plague of the firstborn, that's the divine justice. And this divine justice, it brings, or it threatens the life of the Israelites and the Egyptians. So this justice is fair. It's not targeted at just the Egyptians. But it is targeted at their firstborns. And we saw that a week or two ago when we were talking about that in the lesson, that what God is saying is that the life of his firstborn, which is Israel, and the life of the firstborn of Egypt, he's saying by these actions that they belong to him. I want us to ask a question, though. What does that mean? What this means in this story is that there's a moment when God says, listen, you Israelites living in Egypt, how did you end up in Egypt? Question, how did you wind up here? What, you remember? Oh yeah, your ancestors oppressed that Egyptian slave and just sent Hagar and Ishmael off into the wilderness to die. And then your family members, like your brothers, they all betrayed and nearly murdered and sold one of their own brothers into slavery, who ends up down in Egypt, which is how you ended up here in Egypt. Right? So the Israelites, in terms of their own ancestral responsibilities, their own, the results of their own choices, they have a history of oppression and violence. That's why they're in Egypt in the first place, right? And then it gets doubly complicated because then the Egyptians start taking advantage of them, right? They take advantage of the Egyptians, they wind up in Egypt, the Egyptians take advantage of them. And then they start killing. just like they almost killed the brother, right, Joseph. Just like they almost kill Hagar and Ishmael, Egypt actually does start killing their firstborns, right? And Ishmael is the firstborn of Abraham, right? So you can think of these things in parallel. Hagar and Ishmael and Joseph. He's not the firstborn, but he's the most beloved of Jacob, right? And so they start killing. The Egyptians start killing just like the Israelites or the ancestors. They weren't Israelites yet. How they almost killed. And so everybody is wronging everybody. By the time we end up with the Israelites in Egypt, everybody is trying to mess everybody else over. And what the plagues are, especially, right, this last plague here at the end of the 10 plagues, when Moses is confronting Pharaoh in chapter 11 and 12 of Exodus. What the plagues are is God saying, stop it. God's saying, it's all going to stop here. I am going to stop this. I am going to reclaim life, the life of a symbolic family member of the family. This is the firstborn. You have to think about this culturally in terms of how they viewed the firstborn. The firstborn was the future of the family, right? He is the one who carried on the family legacy. And so on the night of Passover, the redemption word, I've mentioned it before, is not used in the particular story of the night of the Passover. But you could say that Israel was redeemed. Because the story, the hinge that holds the story together was the night of Passover, because on that night, God showed his ownership over life, over the life of every firstborn. He showed that it belongs to him. But God also provided a way for people to, as we say, buy their life back, to repossess their life, to take the life of their firstborn back into their family through the substitute life of this lamb, right? And so the foundational logic, the story underneath the story here, is what the New Testament uses when it's talking about being redeemed by the blood, when it says we are lutron. The whole meaning in the New Testament hinges on the meaning of Passover. I'm going to say this again. It's important, though, that we realize that God is not paying Pharaoh. Do you see that? I've said it 100 times. But who is God paying if this is a payment? Is he paying himself? Well, not really. It's not what's going on here. There is no payment that's going on here, is what I'm trying to say. We use the word ransom as sort of it was a payment. But God is not paying anybody. He's not paying Pharaoh. He's not paying himself. God is demonstrating to the Israelites that all of life belongs to him. I feel like I'm talking like what's that game? All your bases are belong to me. Yeah. I forgot the name of that game. Wings of something? That was early 1990s. That was a long time ago. God is now reclaiming that life. Everyone's life is forfeit. You guys want to go and kill each other? I will take all the life, God says, because it belongs to me. Especially the firstborn's life here in the story. But you can have it back if you offer the sacrifice of this blameless animal. And so in our story in the Exodus, that blood is called a symbol. It's called a sign. And so that blood will let you repossess your life. Not just that my life has been loaned to me, but after Passover, if I'm an Israelite, if I'm a firstborn Israelite, I am renting my life and the continued life of my family, right? That's what the firstborn represents, is the continuation of your family line. And so here's the lesson for us. So we've talked about these things in the abstract. What's the lesson for us here? The lesson for us is that we need to live with that same sort of mentality, that we do not belong to ourselves. In order for us to continue possessing our life, it needs to be given back to us, because we humans act with so much injustice. We go and we take life. We go and we take life, take and take, whether that's through sinful actions directly of murdering somebody, whether that's through breaking up families and teaching the next generation that they can do the same or worse, that ultimately leads to death. But what if there was a sign? What if there was a symbol, which is what the Passover lamb here is called here in chapter 12? It's a sign, it's a symbol that could communicate the truth of that reality, that I'm renting my life from God, that it really doesn't belong to me, that it's just being loaned back to me, it's being given back to me, and that God, in his mercy, wants to give it back to me, my life. By the time we get to the New Testament and we hear Paul talking about this redemption, or Jesus, let's start with Jesus. We looked at Luke chapter 9. I want to hit that real quick. In the New Testament, we find Israel in a new type of slavery, right? And when we see Jesus come onto the scene, he claims to be the one who is rescuing us. He is leading us. He's claiming that he is leading us out of the way of death to life. Man, that sounds kind of like Moses. Right? It's the way out of slavery. It's the way through the wilderness and into the new heavens and the new earth, the new Eden, the new creation, into the land of blessing that he has promised for us. Jesus is this new deliverer, and so Jesus needs to confront the Pharaoh of death itself. Right? But how? How is he going to do that? How is he going to confront death? He could wave a magic wand, right? Zap, no more death. But that's not what he does. Right? Luke 9:22. He said, the Son of Man will suffer many things. Where am I at? Give me 1 second. Turn to Matthew, Mark, Luke 9:22. It is necessary that the Son of Man suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and scribes, to be killed and to be raised the third day. Whatever exodus that Jesus is about to accomplish in Jerusalem, it's going to involve him dying, going to Jerusalem, dying, getting killed, and suddenly we've left the analogy of what Moses did, because that's not what Moses did. But it is what the Passover lamb did. Right? And so when Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, he confronts the religious leaders for their corruption, for their hypocrisy. And so they begin to look for opportunities to kill him. And Jesus plans all this, not just on any week, but on this week of Passover, this week leading up to the Passover. And he does this on purpose. He planned the showdown in the wild, wild west, right? Or east, as it might be, ancient Near East. He planned this showdown in Jerusalem so that it would be timed with their most sacred, their most important feast, yearly feast, right? And so Passover is the night of God's final strike against Egypt. That night when God so clearly defeats Pharaoh and releases Israel from bondage. And so every year, Israel celebrates this night. They celebrate it and called it Passover. And it all leads up to the sacred feast with the unleavened bread of life, it's called in the Torah when they celebrate it, and the wine of blessing. These are important symbols that connect us back to the Exodus. Symbols that Jesus himself celebrates with his disciples the night before he dies. Right? You see, Jesus is thinking in terms of these sacred symbols, these scriptural symbols, maybe I should say. That he gives a meal with these amazingly deep symbols that you don't just think about them. You don't look at them up on the shelf, right? What do you do with them? You take them, you eat them. And you're eating these symbols is how you experience the meaning of them. You see how deep and powerful that is when it comes to taking the Lord's Supper here? So let me just back up for a second. This Passover, it's about the 10th plague, right? And it's about the 10th plague that God brings on Pharaoh. And this is the final one, and this plague is going to convince Pharaoh to let God's people go, to let them go free. And God will bring on Pharaoh the judgment. Let me back up. God is going to bring on Pharaoh and the sons of Egypt and the sons of Israel what Pharaoh brought on the sons of Israel, which is death. Maybe I kind of said that where it wasn't clear. God will bring on Pharaoh and the sons of Egypt the same judgment that Pharaoh brought on Israel. That is death. And so Jesus thinks in terms of those scriptural symbols that I was talking about before. And he didn't write a handbook about the meaning of his death. He gave a meal with those symbols that we're not supposed to just set on a shelf and think about. We eat them. And by eating them is how we experience them. So what we're anticipating in the New Testament, by the time we get to the New Testament and we see Jesus, what we're anticipating is an exodus, because Jesus is talking in Moses language. He's talking in Exodus language about coming out of the land of darkness and into the light. But how does Jesus' death do all that? Well, if we look in the Exodus story, right? If we look in the Exodus story, it was through the blood of the Lamb that Yahweh looked at the houses there in Egypt, right? But what he saw were little houses of refuge. This is where I was going to insert the whole city of refuge thing. Don't have time for that this morning. But when he looked on Egypt, but he saw these little remnant houses, houses of refuge. And then he delivers them from death on that night. He delivers them from death and out of slavery to Pharaoh. And he delivers them on the road in between, on the way to make that covenant of freedom. And then on to freedom in the new land. And Jesus is using the framework of that story that he will go and offer his own human life before the Father, so that all the humans in Israel and all the humans today, of course I'm talking about today as well by the time we get to Jesus, that all of the humans that are killing and hurting each other and ruining each other's lives, ruining God's good creation, God will, we normally think of justice and consequences. But what God actually does for us, please stop, thank you, is give us mercy. That God will have mercy on these people, and he will rescue them from slavery. And it seems like Jesus had in mind more than just Pilate, that Roman governor, or Caiaphas, the high priest. Because he says when he gets arrested, just a few hours after this meal, he says to the guards that are arresting him, "This hour belongs to you and the powers of darkness." What Pharaoh is Jesus confronting here? Is it Pilate? Is he the Pharaoh? Not really. He's not enslaving the whole world. He might be enslaving Israel to a certain point. Who is Pharaoh in this story? Paul calls it the power of sin and death. And with the bread and with the cup, Jesus is saying, come into this house, and I'll make sure that you are able to stay away from Pharaoh's power. Right? That's one form of death, right? Pharaoh can kill us. And I will see you through to the other side, Jesus says. Right? That's on analogy to going through the sea with Moses. Right? Because on one side they had Pharaoh that was going to kill them. On the other side they had the water that was going to kill them. Right? Jesus says, I will see you through to the other side. Through death, through the water, to life on the other side. And so Pharaoh today is not necessarily one individual person that needs to be taken down, although we can summarize him in the person of Satan. Pharaoh is not even one political regime that needs to be taken down. Pharaoh is Satan. Let me just put it to you that way. The Satan that was trying to get them in the wilderness once they had been saved already. And what we see in the New Testament is Paul calls these spiritual powers. These spiritual powers that have woven themselves into our hearts and our minds and our structures in the world around us. The structures of human life and society, such that everyone becomes a Pharaoh, right? We are all in need of being liberated. But we're also the ones keeping ourselves in slavery, right? We are simultaneously the ones preventing our own liberation and the liberation of others. And so Paul is going to use this set of images, and he's going to call them the powers of sin and death. That's 1 Corinthians 15. When Paul is talking about the resurrection, Jesus is what he calls the first fruits. The first fruits of the new creation, right? Because Jesus dies and is raised again, never to die again. The first fruits of new creation. And so Paul says that the powers of sin and death have no hold on him because he has conquered them. And the problem is they have our hooks in us. We are all dying, and we're all in different ways failing to live up to even our own most wonderful ideals for ourselves. We fail even to live up to our own self expectations. And so Jesus offers us a different way, a way to conquer over sin and death, a way to conquer over those spiritual beings that are influencing the world around us. We need to die to sin. And Jesus understood those slave-like conditions that I've been talking about, living enslaved to the world around us. We're so worried about what our friends think, about what somebody's going to say about me at school, that they influence our actions to go and do something that I never wanted to go do myself. That is how sin works in this world. You know, we can blame it on the Roman occupation, right? Maybe we don't live under Rome, but maybe there is some injustice in the world around us that we can try and blame it on. But Jesus saw a much deeper problem than just the Roman occupation, than just the U.S. government, than just any other government problem you want to put on there. Jesus had a worldview that was shaped by the Hebrew Scriptures and by those traditions that he lived by, that he believed that there was a spiritual realm of spiritual powers that were intertwined with the human realm and human powers, that they are equally corrupt and they are corrupting each other, and that all of it has to get washed away so that a new promised land can be born. The problem is God has promised never to destroy the world by water again. Right? So Jesus does it a different way, but he calls it a flood of justice. That by going towards his death, he would be the first one to jump into that flood of God's justice when he's going to overwhelm the world by fire through death and come out the other side. Because it's exactly that. He is going to come out the other side and open a way through that flood of justice to dry land on the other side. And he wants other people to follow him. Don't stay behind and get killed by Pharaoh or put back into slavery. Come through the water to the other side. He is blazing the trail for us. He's going ahead of us. And that makes sense. If we remember Matthew 24. I'll end here. Matthew 24. This is where I'm getting this analogy from. I'm pretty sure this is where I was getting it from. Along about 36, Jesus is talking in parables, and then he comes and he tells everybody, hey, there's nobody who knows the day or the hour that these things are going to happen. Now, concerning the day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. As the days of Noah were, remember, this is a flood analogy. This is what I'm trying to bring up here. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of man will be. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. Just pay attention to yourself. Okay? Don't worry about that. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding grain with a handmill. One will be taken and one will be left. Therefore be alert, since you don't know what the day of the Lord is coming. Day or the hour when the day of the Lord is coming. But know this, if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house get broken into. This is why you are also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Jesus has come to open up a way through the flood of God's justice. Just like he says here in Matthew 24. There's coming a flood, but Jesus is blazing a trail. It's going to be like a flood, he says. But come join me in my ark. And the way we join Jesus in that ark is by dying. By dying to sin, by giving up sin in our life, and putting our faith, our trust, our loyalty in Jesus. That is how the Passover prepares us. It prefigures the Lord's Supper, this thing that we participate in. We don't set it up on a shelf. We don't watch somebody else do it. We participate in it, so that we can join Jesus in that ark to get through the flood of God's justice. Whether it's the destroying angel killing all the firstborn, so we got to paint the blood, or whether it is the ultimate destroying angel in Revelation destroying the world and saving only those who are faithful to God through Jesus in his blood. That's the choice for us this morning. What will you choose? Will you choose to be washed in the blood? To have your sins washed away in baptism when you go down into the water, into the flood, and kill off the old man and come through the waters a new person, just like Jesus promises you, to care for you and take care of you as you put on him in faith and in trust through baptism. What will your choice be this morning? Or you can go back to the quote-unquote easy way and put your faith and your trust in the world and do what everybody else does and see what happens. I can tell you what happens, though. We have a whole historical record of it. There's going to be death and destruction that comes. That's the lesson this morning from this idea of redemption. Next week, we'll look at another aspect of redemption. It's good to have everybody here this morning. We'll see you all next week.